My guest, incidentally, in case you just tuned in, the very eloquent Dr. Terrence Farrell, who is with us. You know him in many incarnations, including former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. We are discussing the CCJ because, in case you tuned in late, I said he is a scholar at large. Those who know him and know of him would concur with that with ease. This question of appointment of judges is something that folks say is also a spoke in the wheel of the willingness of many governments to really come full-fledged aboard with this, because they are afraid of the appointments of these judges and how it could work, even including some minorities or some who consider themselves a group in the region having a problem with the appointments. Is that something you have heard? Is that part of the consideration?
I haven't heard that, quite frankly, about any minorities. But I mean, if that would so, the question is what matters would be affecting a minority in the Caribbean directly. For example, I would imagine the Amerindians in Guyana would constitute such a minority, and they may want to claim certain kinds of rights.
Let me get specific on that, because concerns raised recently, as I said, have been raised specifically to the lack of ethnic and gender diversity in the composition of the justice, given the multicultural nature of some Caribbean societies. That is basically what folks are saying.
Well, the question is, does the multicultural nature of the society impact justice? That is the question. And so somebody has to demonstrate that it does. Precisely. The gender question, I agree with entirely, because where you have, and historically, a lot of the people who have come up to the judiciary have been men. Mm-hmm. In the United Kingdom, that has been a big debate, because a lot of the men come out of Oxford and Cambridge. They are white, Anglo-Saxon, out of Oxford and Cambridge and so on. And there has been a very serious discussion in the United Kingdom about judges, more women judges on the bench, and of course Baroness Hale came up to the UK Supreme Court. She's also on the Privy Council as well, as being the first woman to ascend to that level. In Trinidad, we have not had that difficulty, quite frankly, as far as gender is concerned. We have had female judges at the highest level. We haven't had a female Chief Justice as yet, but we have had senior justices of appeal who have been female. A lot of them now on the current Court of Appeal are in fact female. But so I agree with the point about ensuring that at the CCJ level that there is sufficient, in fact, all women on the CCJ. That's entirely possible. So I would agree with that. The multicultural point I would agree with if you can demonstrate to me how it is that multicultural issues may bear on some things that the judges may have to decide.
And sometimes I think folks are looking for pretext, because, I mean, at the end of the day, is anybody going to have a discussion with the folks of the Privy Council and talk about their bias?
Well, it's a whole different that's the point. And that's the point. And they do have biases.
Yes,
they do have biases. Because of their background and their training and so on, they come to issues with that kind of bias. The same is true of the United States Supreme Court.
There are some idiosyncrasies of the region that they will not be privy to. And as best as represented by an attorney, as proficient as he may be, he is giving his client's case or the state's case. He's not dealing with the entire culture of the society, the all-inclusive, which is a determinant in arriving at a decision of time, is it not?
Yes, it could be. It certainly could be. So the nearer the court is to the society, the nearer the court is to the sensitivities and so on of the culture and so on, the better it is. And therefore, this is the argument against Privy Council. The Privy Council is remote and has been remote. Our CCJ would be drawn from people from the region. In fact, the CCJ is constituted so that, for example, we have, there is room for, I think, 2 civil judges, that is to say, civil law judges. We have one now who is Justice Witt, who came from Curacao, because remember that there are civil law jurisdictions. In fact, St. Lucia's, some parts of St. Lucia's law is considered to be civil law. Some parts of Guyana's law is civil law. And so therefore you need to have people who are versed in civil law on the CCJ. So I think there's provision for that. You'd want to have the widest possible representation. We have Justice Anderson, who is from Jamaica on the court. We have Justice Saunders, who's from the Eastern Caribbean. The President, Byron, is from Dennis Byron. He's from St. Kitts. We've had Justice Rajnath Lee, who is from Trinidad, who just went on to the court. So there is already a diversity, I think, on the
controversial decision you spoke a while ago of, when we talk about what has happened in the region, oftentimes is state up against state, and that's part of the fueling the insularities, what fuel some of this suspicion. The controversial decisions, or so-called controversial decision cases like Joseph and Boyce Trinidad, also the Myrie case, brought the CCJ into the limelight and raised questions as to whether the decisions would result in a backlash against intra-regional immigrants. That is something that a lot of folks say they see as a problem in the open arms embracing the CCJ.
Well, I think the Myrie case was, in a lot of respects, a kind of a landmark ruling because it demonstrated that our politicians, unfortunately, they go to these CARICOM meetings, they make decisions, they come back home and they forget about it. And they did not understand the implications of the decisions that they had made. So what the CCJ has pointed out to them is that you have made a decision, you have signed on to something here, and this is the implication of what you signed on to. That a CARICOM national can come into a CARICOM country once they are not a criminal, once they are not any such thing, and they are entitled to stay for up to 6 months.
Yes.
And that's what the Myrie case has established. And unfortunately, our government simply didn't realize that they had in fact agreed to that.
You made a point a moment ago. My guest is Dr. Terrence Farrell. That's the gentleman who you're hearing this morning. We're talking about the CCJ 21 minutes after 10 o'clock, and you make the case as to how Trinidad and Tobago nationals are going to get involved in this. We're not talking referendum. We're just talking about a clear understanding as to what this is about. So usually what comes into play is what is in it for Trinidad and Tobago. Chief Justice recently lamented that we need to have a CCJ because it will cut down on the issue of the number of cases we have pending before the Privy Council. Right. You opined one time about what you call unequal justice. And this is the case. If you don't have the money to go to the Privy Council, then in fact you're not getting there. Right. And if you don't have the immediate money to get there, then you're talking about justice delayed. Justice delayed is justice denied. Right. Speak to that from a Trinidad perspective so folks will understand what is in it for Trinidad and Tobagonians to insist that their government move fast and get this done.
Well, you're quite right. One of the key points is access. And this is one of the points that the CCJ has emphasized. The CCJ is going to be an accessible court, and it is going to be a court that is affordable. In fact, there's a specific provision in the CCJ that if you are poor, for example, that they will make special provision for you to be able to access the CCJ, even though you are poor, even though you can't afford these high-priced lawyers and so on.
Akin to a legal aid society sort of thing.
Akin to that, yes. I mean, they will allow you to be heard, and in fact, there's at least one case where they have in fact done that. There was, I think it's a case out of Guyana where a lady could not provide what is called security for costs, and they said, well, yeah, maybe she should provide security for costs, but in this particular instance, we are going to hear her, notwithstanding the fact that she can't provide the security for costs. So that is a critical point. The point about access. It is very, very difficult for somebody to take a civil or commercial matter to the Privy Council unless you have a lot of money. And if you look at the cases that have gone to the Privy Council from Trinidad and Tobago involving civil and commercial matters, they are done by people who have the resources to afford senior counsel and so on, because that's what you need to go to the Privy Council. We would like to have a situation where our highest court is in fact accessible to all, and the CCJ is structured to be able to do that. So I think that's an extremely important
point. As you said, and they are right, their ears are right on the ground, not next to the ground, but they are underground.
They're underground.
The new administration has repeatedly affirmed its commitment to the CCJ. How optimistic are you that this will be done in short order? The new administration.
Yes, I mean, it certainly is in the manifesto of the new administration, and the current Prime Minister has spoken about it. Prior to becoming Prime Minister, he has said, look, this administration is going to accede to the CCJ if we can. Now, I think, obviously, the question is, will they be able to get a majority in the Parliament in Trinidad?
Speak to our listeners so they clearly understand that this is not a simple majority. That they don't. I mean, what do they need in order to get this done?
You are you are going to require a special majority.
Special majority.
Yeah, you're going to require a special majority. Yeah.
So you must have cooperation.
Yes.
And if we have anything like what we have seen, God help us. Anyway, I opine. I digress. My guest is Dr. Terrence Farrell, a fellow of the Institute of Banking and Finance of Trinidad and Tobago. He studied economics at the University of the West Indies and at the University of Toronto, where he obtained his PhD in 1979. He holds a LLB degree additionally. So there is no way I'm going to get him here without getting into economics. I'll get to that after my final question to you. If you had to make a 1, 2, 3 for Trinidad and Tobago nationals to insist, in addition to what we have done, if you had to have them walk away with a 1, 2, 3 as to what they must insist of the elected representatives of their government to get this done, what would that be? And if you had to make a 1, 2, 3, if necessary, to propel the government to move faster, what would that be?
Well, I think one of the things that needs to happen actually is that we need to get the Law Association on board. Our Law Association here is not yet on board. There was an attempt made a couple of months ago by the new president of the Law Association. That matter has been deferred because they said that the lawyers in Trinidad don't understand the CCJ and so on, which is quite mysterious to me, quite frankly, because the CCJ has been around for 10 years. I've been at law school. It is the CCJ judgments are taught at law school. The jurisdictions, Barbados and so on, practice in the CCJ jurisdiction. So I can't understand how people say they don't understand it and they don't understand the judgments. But anyway, be that as it may, I think they need to get the lawyers on board. I think that people need to be writing to their representatives, and certainly on the government side, there's probably no need because the government has already made a commitment and is going to do that. I think that the opposition needs to be persuaded that this needs to happen. I think that if Jamaica goes and St. Lucia goes, we quite frankly will be left standing alone. Trinidad and Tobago and Mauritius.
Almost a reversal of Eric Williams' 10 minus 1 equals 0.
That's right.
Ironic.
How ironic it would be. It would be. And we would look quite foolish in the eyes of the world. We are already looking foolish elsewhere because one of the Supreme Court judges in the United Kingdom, Lord Phillips, who's also on the Privy Council, had said years ago that these countries need to come out of the Privy Council. They are burdening the Privy Council. In fact, they were threatened at one time that they would lower the standard of judges who would be hearing cases coming out of our jurisdiction. So that I think that the case is compelling. I think it's a no-brainer, quite frankly, and I think we just simply need to get on with it. We have excellent judges in the CCJ. We need, of course, to ensure that the CCJ operates properly. One of the things that happens to us in our societies, of course, is that our institutions, we tend to allow our institutions to corrode. We need to ensure that the CCJ maintains a very high standard in terms of its administration, in terms of its operation, to ensure that the best quality judges from around the region are encouraged to apply and to sit on the CCJ. So,
just for clarity, the final decision on appointing judges, what is the mechanism in place for that?
There is a regional Judicial and Legal Services Commission, and they are the ones people can apply. Judges can apply with the requisite experience and so on, of course, and they can apply to the Service Commission. They will then, make a recommendation for the appointment.
27 minutes after 10 o'clock, coming up in another 30 minutes is going to be my guest on the question of procurement. We will be talking about that because that is another one at the top of our plate. My guest would love to delve into that, but it's already covered for this morning. Vaughan Rondon will be joining us to talk about that. However, my scholar plenipotentiary, my new designation for him, is going into the area of where he knows, you know him more importantly which is the area of banking. Moving into the Trinidad and Tobago economy, Dr. Terrence Farrell, my guest. Indicators say if we revisited the glory days of high oil prices, it will plateau at about $70. If that happens, we will still not benefit over a long period because our supply right now is about 10 to 12 years there. Even with deep water drilling or exploration, as many people say, it is stated that the yield is very little. So in fact, we have to find different ways of going. What do we have to do, or what do we have to sell or retrain the workforce for should we not revisit any days that resemble the glory days of $100 to $144 a barrel, which we're not going to happen.
Well, you can't say it's not going to happen. We don't know. But what we have to do is
the optimist this morning. That is good.
No. I'm saying it could happen, but I'm saying that what we have to do is that we have to assume that it won't. In other words, we have to approach our economic management, I think, in a fashion that is sufficiently conservative. We have to understand who we are, what our place is in the world. We are a small island economy. We have significant resources of oil and natural gas. Barbados doesn't have it, and the other islands don't have it. Jamaica doesn't have it. We have that. As you quite rightly pointed out, our natural gas reserves need to be restored because we are only now down to 9 years or 10 years, I think, in terms of proven reserves. We even our oil is about, the reserves production ratio for oil is about 10 years, but it has been 10 years for the last 100 years.
Okay.
But oil production has in fact been declining. We're now down from about 225,000 barrels per day in 1978. We are now down to less than 80,000 barrels per day today. And that's a problem. So we need to get our exploration and production activity sustained, but even in deep water, the prospectivity in deep water is apparently good, but the problem with deep water is, well, it's deep, so that it means that it's expensive to explore those resources.
The return on investment is going to see so far a field force will not be disposed to doing it easily.
Well, particularly in this point in time, because you see, it's going to be the multinationals who are going to have to do it. And at this point in time, a lot of the multinational oil companies are cutting back on their capital investment in this climate of low oil and gas prices. And that's a very natural thing. However, the good thing is that our companies here, which is British Gas and BP, Repsol and so on, those companies already have a committed program as far as exploration and development in Trinidad and Tobago is concerned. So we expect that the exploration activity in deep water will continue, and that we can in fact make some decent finds for gas, if not for oil.
Put a couple of things to rest for me, please, Doctor. You were saying that even though it is more expensive to do the deep drilling, deep water drilling, as it were, you're saying that we can still extract a lot of oil from what you know of this situation. There's still a lot more oil to be extracted, because one of the things I heard is that our the availability is drying up. Even when you do the deep water drilling, the yield is not profitable.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think that the geologists who I speak to are really quite confident. Now, obviously, if you drill in deep water, what you would like to do is to be able to find a fairly sizable pool, so to speak, of oil or of gas that you can exploit. You don't want a small pool, because then it's going to become uneconomic for you to exploit it. There are still, in fact, smaller pools of gas that are available closer to shore in shallow water, maybe at greater depths. But those are going to be less than 1 trillion cubic feet of gas and so on. So like the Savonette field, for example, is 1 trillion, 1.2 trillion TCF. There may be smaller pools around which we can exploit to be able to deal or to help to mitigate the natural gas shortage that we're currently experiencing. But having said all of that, what I'm saying here really is that we have to continue to exploit our oil and gas resources. Energy for us is not going to go away.
Right.
However, the imperative for the country is, how do we diversify? And for me, diversification means something really quite simple. It means how do you find or develop activities which can generate foreign exchange for the country.
And that is exactly my question with the diversification urgency right at our door. What do we have to sell, or how do we have to go about retraining the workforce for this diversification?
Yes. Well, I think that what we need to be doing is that we want to be looking at certain activities, and I want to even call them sectors, because I think that in any sector that you have potentially has the potential to export. So, for example, there are some which come very easily to mind. Our energy services sector. So this is not explicit. These are the people who provide services to the oil and gas exploration companies. That sector has developed very well. We have a fair amount of capability in that sector. and you can put that capability to work in other countries. So, for example, Guyana has found oil and energy resources. Suriname has found energy resources.
That's after your discussion with Venezuela.
Well, Venezuela already has capacity. Ghana has found significant oil resources. So that if we can get our energy services companies to, as some of them are already doing, to move into those areas to be able to provide their services. You see, because we must stop thinking about exports as being exporting things, exporting oil or gas or manufacturers and so on. We can export services. So, for example, tourism is a service export. Tourism is an industry, as a business, that is particularly important to Tobago. If we can get our tourism sector going, it provides export earnings for the country. So, what we need to be doing is that we need to be marrying our creativity, our creative industries, and so on, but also trying to make sure that we orient them towards earning foreign exchange. It is not going to be sufficient to be able to say, I build highways and I build hospitals and I build all those kinds of things and so on, and the country is continuing to consume more and more and more foreign exchange.
The area of finding the things that we can, in fact, export. You speak of services, one way we can do that. Folks speak of tourism, which is always an easy catch, but I like how you differentiated. Listen, that's Tobago's. However, a fellow economist, Dr. Maguire, said that cultural tourism is something that we have to look at. One of the things I have not heard folks remark on, and I wondered about it recently, is the whole question of medical tourism. A lot of folks are coming here because of the weather to the Caribbean.
Yes.
A lot of the elder folks who are in fact paying with the money to spend are in need of some kind of health service or the other. It will take some time in planning that, but I proffer that could be a wonderful way, a wonderful direction to go.
Yes, but to do that, it's a possibility, but I mean, to do that, you have to have medical facilities and personnel who are absolutely first class.
Yes. And accredited internationally,
correct.
In the United States.
And so therefore, to make that happen, you need to build that capability.
And I am thinking for the long term.
For the long term,
not immediately, no.
That's right. Because as you know, right now, we cannot say that our medical facilities and our personnel are...
let me use the local parlance and say, because stay with me now, partner. What I'm trying to do is get something for the locals at the same time I'm getting something for the tourism, because if we go the medical tourism, it means we definitely must lift our standards. We must establish a meaningful health community. One, we'll find a way of keeping our doctors here because they have something to work to,
right?
And because we can get foreign exchange if our folks are in fact internationally accredited, then we get the money coming in. So it's a 2-4 is what I'm sort of
absolutely
looking at.
And to your point about cultural tourism, and it's an area I know that you're very keenly interested in, as is Gregory Maguire and so on. And I think that one of the things that I would certainly like to for people like yourselves to explore is how do we organize our cultural activities in a way that can be marketed directly to people who are coming to Trinidad. Okay, so for example, if I'm putting on a play, we had Hathaway put on recently by Suniti Mirage and so on in Central Bank Auditorium. It's put on in November. It's put on largely for local audiences. The audiences are relatively small. How could we? Can we see ourselves having, for example, a theatre season, which is somehow related or linked to the point in time in the year when we have more tourists coming to Trinidad for Carnival, whatever it is, and so on and so on and so forth. Okay, the same might be for sports tourism.
Or even create one, as they have done with the movie industry. What they do in New York, they have a tourism week. Where, so the question of culinary tourism is something they can work here with the many different plates we have here, and we can create something to create that intra-regional awareness, win a couple of awards, and then tell the world, listen, this is the place to come.
That's right. Film festivals, Toronto Film Festival. Francis Ann Solomon has been doing tremendous work, taking our videographers and filmmakers and so on to the Toronto International Film Festival. So our film festival here, I think, has grown. It is developing very well. The Bocas Lit Fest has been growing, has been developing very well. But we need to find ways of coordinating some of these activities in a way that can then, how can we find ways of generating some foreign exchange from that? For example, St. Lucia has piggybacks on their two Nobel laureates, which is Derek Walcott and Sir Arthur Lewis. And in January, they have something called Nobel Laureate Week. And this in January, it's a point in time when a lot of tourists are in St. Lucia and so on. And they have a number of activities related to their Nobel laureates, Derek Walcott and Arthur Lewis. So I think we need to be thinking about along those lines. And I'm saying the focus always should be on, okay, we need to generate revenue, but let's also think about how some of that revenue that we can generate is in foreign exchange.
My guest, of course, is Dr. Terrence Farrell, and I am going to get into move away from the tourism area because I merely wanted to get your view on that whole diversification issue and get into the question of the budget that we just heard, specifically as it relates to the Revenue Authority. It is not a panacea, but if you listen to the Minister of the Finance Minister, you get the feeling it is a very important pillar. It's almost one of those things you can use as a stud. One of the central blocks of this is the collection of revenue through the Revenue Authority. And you're looking at the big picture of that, it looks good. Looking for the immediate implementation of it, I think, is overly optimistic. I don't see that happening in under a year. And that being the case, it's a long time going without revenue that is going to meet this deficit we have already, is it not?
Well, all right. Let me step back a little bit and say that the Revenue Authority is one of the proposals for institutional reform, institutional change, which is on the agenda of the government. We have been operating here in this country with institutions which have remained unchanged since independence. The way in which our Board of Inland Revenue has been modeled on the inland revenue in the United Kingdom of 50 years ago. So, and in fact, the only major change that we have made to our tax system has been the introduction of the value-added tax in 1989.
Also known as only the fools pay.
Really? Well, I hope not. And so this is where Revenue Authority comes in, because your Revenue Authority is going to set up systems which will allow for maintaining unified or linked databases that would then allow the Revenue Authority to be able to identify where a particular individual or a particular set of companies or group of companies may be underpaying their tax, whether it is customs duties, whether it is value-added tax, whether it is corporation tax, and so on and so forth. And then to be able to ensure that the state gets what is due to it. Now, you're quite right in saying that to get that going is going to take some time. But remember, of course, that this administration had already started work on the Revenue Authority prior to demitting office in 2010. They had gone a considerable way, actually, I think, to the point of appointing certain people to be on the board of that TTRA. So a lot of work has already been done. Okay. So I think that actually they can hit the ground running in terms of getting the TTRA set up. Having said that, your point is correct. I don't think that you're going to see the benefit of that for some time. In the meantime, the Inland Revenue has to do what it can and should do to try to maximize the amount of revenue that it can get from corporation and from other taxes. I mean, but what we mean simply by that is not that you're extracting more tax from people than they should pay, but it is making people pay the tax that they should pay.
They should be. David Abdullah is very concerned that this, like most of us, this is not balanced on the backs of the working people. But truth of the matter is, if you have an effective system set up, procedure set up, you are in fact spreading your net to those who should be paying it, and it will not be only on the backs of the poor.
No, I don't think the working people are not an issue, because if you remember, I think this is during the period of time that Brian Kwaitong and Jerry Yetming were finance ministers under the UNC, actually, that the system was reformed so that in respect of PAYE, the onus is on the company to ensure that PAYE is remitted. And I think that was a tremendous innovation, because it simply made the tax administration and so on a lot easier. What you have to focus on really are the self-employed people, the doctors, the lawyers, those types of people and so on, and to ensure that they pay their fair share of tax, to ensure that the big companies also, groups of companies and so on, pay their fair share of tax. And I don't think that working people, meaning to say paid employees, at all a problem.
I'm in concurrence with that. I merely mentioned David because he was concerned that, in fact, this thing come on stream to make these people, in fact, pay as is the plan. And in the short term, that folks are not saddled with it. Recently, the government invited the IMF, it is reported, to take a look, and the IDB, to take a look at the whole mass transit issue. A lot of folks are making a big deal about the IMF being invited by the government. My question to you is...
This is IDB, not IMF.
The IDB, for the mass transit issue. Yes. But I also had the Minister of Finance make some mention of the IMF in the projection, I believe, of where oil prices are going. But folks are generally saying that you are looking at the government asking the IMF to look in and advise them on this. Even if that is the case, and I just want to ask this, even if that is the case, is that not just good consultation?
It absolutely is. That's the purpose of the IMF, The IMF is a very important resource as far as that is concerned. I think on those kinds of macroeconomic management issues, you turn to the IMF and get their advice. You may take on the advice or you may not.
It truly does not matter what they say, and if the IMF was invited. And you got my point exactly. Yes. There is nothing wrong with consultation. Lack of that is where you make mistakes.
Precisely. And on those kinds of issues, the IMF. On development issues, issues relating to infrastructure and so on, you go to the development banks. You go to the IDB, you go to the CDB. We can't go to the World Bank anymore because we have been graduated. We can no longer borrow from the World Bank. But even so, there are those kinds of institutions and so on that you can go to for advice. And I think it's... Yeah.
I just wanted to put that at rest. The IDB said that your mass transit idea is a good one to look at, allegedly, to say it is sound. How do you feel about that?
I think they're looking at it. I don't think that they have said it is yet. I think it's under review. So if they do say it's a go, I think that I think we should proceed with it. I certainly, in terms of my own experience of what we are seeing on the roads these days, I think it is quite maddening. But again, in terms of setting expectations, understand that it is going to take some time before you can actually build out any kind of mass transit system.
I tell you, so many people will be employed in it, and you're going to get some productive hours back, and a whole lot of things are going to work. Not only that, the money you pay to repair the infrastructure that you're putting all this weight on, and you have forever spending money in a hole, as it were. Talking about spending money in a hole, massive squandermania is what it has been referred to by many, and while my upcoming guest, Vaughn Rondon, will be talking about procurement, I would not duplicate that, but I will ask you this. You wrote a column that said accountability is not a witch hunt.
Yes.
A lot of folks believe that what is happening here when you hear all this money being wasted is a witch hunt. Delineate for me, please. Differentiate between it so our listeners are very clear.
Well, a witch hunt is simply something that is irrational and malicious. That's what a witch hunt is. Accountability is really quite different. If you put somebody in charge of something, and that person has a certain set of duty, you put them in a position of trust, and they therefore have a certain duty. In this case, a duty to the public to discharge those responsibilities in a particular kind of way. And they do not, and it ends up resulting in waste, it ends up resulting in fraud, it ends up resulting in any of those things, then they need to be held to account. It's as simple as that.
A lot of people share that view, but they also, just about everybody I speak to, including a conversation on the plane last night, not the best place I want to have that conversation, but including there is the issue of all of these investigations will amount to zero because it has always traditionally accounted to zero. Nobody gets handcuffs. Nobody is held to account except that you have these wonderful probes and all of this. How optimistic are you that if, in fact, the massive squandermania is not just words being used, but in fact there is proof of massive squandermania and theft, that folks will be brought to justice?
Optimistic. I wouldn't say optimistic. What I would say is that in order to make sure that these things do happen and have that result, there are some things that we need to put in place because they're not in place at the moment. We do not have, and we need to be honest about this, we do not have a police service that has the capability of carrying out the investigation of that kind of white-collar those kind of white-collar activities.
Let me beg you to do as my mother would say, which I always laugh when she said, stick a pin for a moment, because the Revenue Authority is supposed to look at income and wealth. Is that one of the processes? Because I neglected to ask you that when we were on that topic. Is that not something that we would expect the Revenue Authority to
yes, the Inland Revenue can do that. In fact, they can do it now. They can ask you, as the Calypso said, where you get this, where you get that, where you get the superintendent hat. So they can ask you, how did you come by this? But what we need to put in place, as I said in the article that I wrote, is that we need to put in place an offense of illicit enrichment.
Yes.
Where you can ask any public officer, a superintendent of police, an inspector of police who is living at large in a mansion somewhere, and you can go and you ask him, where did you get this?
So just ask him if he's familiar with...
If your salary is $15,000 a month or whatever it is and so on, could you please explain how come you happen to be living in a house that is worth $5 million?
And in case you don't, your name is not on the house, have you heard of the guy called Rico?
Right.
Explain to our listeners what Rico is.
But you need to have the offense. You need to have the people to investigate it. And I'm saying that the police is deficient in that regard. And then we need to have a DPP who is ready and willing to prosecute. The DPP's office, unfortunately, has a lot of problems, including problems of manpower. A lot of the lawyers who come out of law school, including those who I went to school with and so on, do not want to practice criminal law. So that although we have a surplus of lawyers in the place, we tend to have a deficit in respect of people wishing to practice criminal law. Even when they get into the DPP's office, they end up staying there for 2 or 3 years and then they move on. Even the more senior officers in the DPP's office, after a while, they will go and they will get a job as a judge in the Eastern Caribbean and then come back onto the judiciary here and so on. So the DPP's office has some problems, and part of the problem has to do with the compensation of the staff in the DPP's office. So we have to fix the numbers in the DPP's office, and we have to address the question of compensation in the DPP's office. To address compensation in the DPP's office, we have to get the Service Commission, the Public Service Commission, and the Salary Review Commission to understand that certain positions and certain offices need to be paid in a different manner. So the whole question of compensation within the public service now needs to be looked at. So I'm saying that there are all of these factors that need to be looked at in terms of how you address the problem of white-collar crime. But I think that there is a commitment, let me just say, and it seems to me there's a commitment on the part of the Attorney General and the Minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General, Stuart Young. There is a commitment on their part to pursue the investigations of this quantumania and to attempt as far as possible to hold people to account.
Let's see, you started at Lady Chancellor, I started to climb that, then you went to Everest. Because you started out with the police service, you went to the DPP, and now we're talking about getting the legislation to do that. All right, let us hold that we are optimistic on that, because yes, clearly from what we're hearing, articulated, there is really commitment to get this done. My guest has been the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Terrence Farrell. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and covering so many topics. Trinidad and Tobago through the eyes of Dr. Farrell. If you look at all the things we discussed this morning and you had to convince an investor that this is the place you want to come to, and he looks at the work ethic and all these things, how do you convince him to do that? And equally, along with that, I'll just do a compound here. How would you talk to our universities as to training people for what the country needs?
Well, the university is a special problem by itself, I think, quite frankly. I think, unfortunately, we have created within our education system, we've created a culture of entitlement. The work ethic, I think, unfortunately, is not strong as it ought to be. People don't have a sense of sacrificing to achieve. That seems to be gone. It's about how much I can get, how much I'm entitled to get. So I have a degree, and therefore I am entitled to this. It's not about how much I can contribute and so on. So that needs to be changed. And in fact, it can be changed in the classrooms. It can be changed in not only primary schools and so on. It can even be changed at the level of the university. It is really what your university lecturers tell you and talk to you about. When I was a university student at the University of the West Indies, I had people like Lloyd Best and Eric Sincere and those kinds of people and so on talking about those kinds of things and talking about the right kind of values and so that you ought to have in terms of when you go out to work. And I think that has stayed with those those of us. I think a lot of that has changed. To an investor coming into Trinidad and Tobago, I would say that, look, listen, we are not going to go any lower than where we are now. I think that there is a commitment on the part of the Prime Minister, and certainly in terms of what he has articulated, in terms, for example, the whole question of devolving executive authority to local government. In other words, you're talking about the government, you're talking about the Prime Minister giving up authority. This is the first time, I think, in the history of this country that we have heard a Prime Minister talking about giving up authority.
Yes.
Let the local government, let the regional corporations do what they need to do and so on. Let the Tobago House of Assembly manage the affairs of Tobago. Let the judiciary manage its affairs. Allow the parliament, they haven't done that yet, allow the parliament to manage its affairs. So the central executive gives up executive authority, and I think that is going to be significant.
A lot of the ground problems that people encounter day to day, by giving the local government that authority, that is going to ease up a whole lot of them.
Absolutely.
And hold them accountable for it. So, as I say, thank you and wish you a very good Sunday. The little boy who's crying wolf, should I listen to him?
Who is this?
The little boy who's crying wolf. Doom and gloom.
Oh, no.
I shall not pay any attention.
Let's be optimistic.
Dr. Terrence Farrell, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I truly appreciate you. Have yourself a wonderful day, sir.
Thank you. You too.
I thank you so very much.